Hey everybody, welcome back to Slavic Saturday, where we talk about Slavic history, mythology, and folklore. My name is Brendan Noble, author of the Frostmarked Chronicles, which is my fantasy series based on Slavic mythology. Sorry about the glasses with a little bit of glare this time. My contacts aren't working well today, so we're going ahead with the glasses. And today we're talking about the summer solstice, and one of the main traditions of the summer solstice and kind of the stories around it, which was a search for the fern flower. And this was around the festival of cupola night, or not kupali in Polish. And you can go watch the video about that I made a while ago that talked about the festival in general, but today we're going to talk about mainly the search for this magical flower. Before I dive too far into the fern flower though, if you are interested in Slavic mythology, be sure to check out the first book in the Frostmarked Chronicles called A Dagger in the Winds. It just released this past week, and I'm super excited to be able to share it with everyone. You can be able to check that out down in the links down in the description below. And if you would like to be able to receive the prequel novella as well, you can receive that for free by joining my monthly newsletter down in the description below as well. I've loved hearing everyone's feedback for the books, and I'm really looking forward to continuing to share these stories with you. But now let's talk more about the fern flower. So the fern flower, which is also known as the fire flower, is really based again around this cupola night tradition on the summer solstice. The fern flower can also be related to the winter solstice in some stories as well, but the main emphasis here is on the summer solstice. Because around the solstice, it was considered a time where magic was plentiful, and that meant a lot of interesting things could happen. Cupola night itself was considered a kind of fertility festival where couples could try to get together, both getting together and also getting engaged. Because the Slavs, like many other societies in the early times, had a tradition of parents often choosing who their children wed, and this was kind of a loophole time in which kids could try to choose who they were getting married to when they were around that age. Girls would create wreaths and be able to put them on their heads, and then at the end of the day would float them down the river, and it was said that if a man or boy retrieved this wreath, then the two could choose to get engaged. This was usually rigged if they tried to do it in the right way and to try to get engaged. It was also said that they could go into the forest, and if they came out together, there was the idea that they could be engaged because he got the flower wreath. If you want to hear more about those traditions, again, please, you can go watch the video about cupola night. But it's important to understand this because there's this joke that occurs in Polish society even today that said if you're going to go get the fern flower, it was a focus on the kind of romantic element, because during this fertility festival, people would go into the woods and they weren't looking for the fern flower. I will let you draw your own conclusions on that. But around this fertility festival, for the people who were actually searching for the fern flower, it was thought to come out only at midnight during the solstice, which was the time of the peak magical power. It was a dangerous quest though. People would search for it because they thought that they could get massive amounts of wealth, and there was claims that you could even sometimes have powers to fight dark magic, or even read people's minds, or be able to speak to animals depending on the story. So it was a very mythical kind of flower, and people would pursue it during this time. But because magic was plentiful during the solstice, and around the fern flower meant there was even more magic, and this something called demons and different spirits and witches who could interrupt the seeker's path as they tried to search for the fern flower. It was a glowing thing that was thought to even sometimes make a noise that could lure people to it. But it was a difficult path, because being able to defeat these people or get past them to reach the fern flower was a very difficult and treacherous journey, because people could die along the way. Even when you reached the fern flower itself, it was thought to be a tall fern in which you would have to climb. You draw a circle around it of protection, and when you're climbing the fern, demons would tempt you every second of the way. And if you ever looked at any of the demons and gave in to any of their temptation, you would die instantly. So it was a very dangerous journey, and even when you managed to get the fern flower though, there was another little bit of a treacherous element around it. And you could say that getting the fern flower successfully could almost be more scary than failing to do so, because of those who retrieved the fern flower, according to some stories, received the massive amount of wealth or potentially the other powers, but they were unable to share any of it. The idea of this, that they could see people suffering around them, and it was often said in these tales that their families could suffer and die or become into poverty, but them being incredibly wealthy could never share any of it. If they would give any away, the entirety of the wealth would disappear, and so it eats them up on the inside as they watch those around them suffer while they are incredibly wealthy. In other tales as well, there is the element of they actually get the reward, but there seems to be this prominence of this other story that is a little bit more tragic, which is interesting because it really shows this focus of the early Slavic societies and even later Slavic societies when this kind of became a more Christian tale as well with its own other elements, but this focus on community and the family and the idea of this individual selfishness searching for the Fern Flower, which was incredibly risky. Like I said, you're risking everything in this pursuit for wealth, and the idea is leaving your family behind and abandoning them would tear them apart more than the idea of just being able to be with those they loved. So while the tale could be that of an adventurer's bravery in searching the Fern Flower, it can also be one of trial and tragedy afterwards when they realize what it does to them. And in my own stories, the Frostmarked Chronicles, I have not introduced the Fern Flower yet because Cupola Night is a little bit later in the year in which A Dagger in the Wind starts, but it is planned for either later in the series or a side novella depending on just how things work out, because it's such an interesting element, this idea of the trials that someone goes through to get the Fern Flower and also the trials they go through afterwards are fascinating, and it really is cool to be able to explore how that impacts both the individual and the people around them, and that would be a fun thing to work out. That's all I have for you today on this Slavic Saturday video. I hope you enjoyed it. Please remember to like and subscribe down below if you did. I come out with these videos every Saturday.